Today we're talking about My Brilliant Friend, an Italian and Neapolitan language coming-of-age drama TV show based on Elena Ferrante's Neapolitan novel series. So what aspects of My Brilliant Friend show us true events in Italian history? What do the main characters represent as historical guides to post-fascist Italy? This show captures some major historical events in post-war Italy, such as the explosion of development and modernity in Italy, mirrored by the underdevelopment of regions and the continued impoverishment of working-class communities. Lenu and Lila, the two protagonists, grow up together in the same working-class neighborhood of Rione Lusati, though their lives diverge dramatically when Lila is denied the right to continue past elementary school and her parents force her to work in their family's shoe repair shop. Lenu is allowed to continue school even though she feels that Lila is more deserving and is likely a genius. Lila is also more confident, and this spurs feelings of jealousy in Lenu that haunts her entire life. This video covers three major topics in Italian history to help contextualize the show's historical backdrop. These are communism versus fascism, organized crime, and the intersections of gender and class, with Lila and Lenu's characters exemplifying two sides of the same coin of modernity. The show begins in post-fascist Italy, where the promise of modernization hangs over everyone's heads. The characters find themselves taunted by new possibilities and desires that seem often out of reach. The show focuses on working-class female friendship, depicting the intersections of gender and class in this post-war era, the shadows of poverty, the failures of modernization, and the struggle against organized crime groups and fascism. Pasquale, a childhood friend of the protagonist, represents socialists, armed struggle, and the fight against fascism in continuations of violence, such as during the years of lead. Don Achille and the Solaris represent the Camorra, organized crime, and fascism, and Rione Lusati, the neighborhood, is similar to a character in that it is ever-changing and growing, yet somehow remaining the same, which also speaks to modernity, development, and underdevelopment. The neighborhood colors their whole lives, unable to fully escape it and unable to fully abandon it too. The characters of the show, Lila and Lenu, are both born in 1944, around when fascism ends, so the author really wanted to show the evolution of post-fascist Italy. The modernity that haunts this show is that which began in the early 20th century, when fascism arose as a response to communist organizing. The corporate elites and oligarchs make alliances with local organized crime groups, war veterans, squadrons, and gangs, and enable, nurture, or incite them to do their dirty work, which is that of stopping working-class organizing and stopping the social advancement of minorities, which would threaten the interests of the oligarchs or corporate technocrats. This is a modernity that has haunted all of humanity since the beginning of the 20th century, coming out of imperialism and European colonization, industrialization, and then World War I and II, followed by the Cold War, until today, where we continue to be divided by these similar class and colonial dynamics. How did the Camorra, the Neapolitan Mafia, and organized crime groups become so entrenched in Naples and the Rione? In the aftermath of World War II, inflation and debts in Italy were massive, and people's savings became worthless. But even before the war, Naples had been one of Italy's poorest cities, suffering decades of chronic underinvestment from central government. In response to the war crisis and American investment, the Camorra seized the opportunity, facilitating the establishment of an extensive black market for essential commodities. By the time Ferrante's story begins in 1950, these criminal gangs were thriving in working-class neighborhoods. In the 1950s, in Rione Lusati, poverty was extreme, which made for perfect conditions for organized crime and these violent patriarchal systems to flourish. Violence and patriarchy pervade the lives of the women in the show and depict the degrading things many of them must do for protection and survival, such as marrying the local fascists and mafia. Class dynamics are ever present in the show, with bourgeois and working class clashing, often symbolized through Lila and Lenu. The bourgeois speak for and on behalf of working class communities and romanticize while at the same time revile the working class, which is best portrayed in the episode where Lenu takes Lila to a party of her wealthy teacher's house. Lila criticizes the discussions at the party where the bourgeois characters theorize and discuss poverty, war, peace movements, internationalism, fascism, communism, without having much real lived experience to draw upon. Lila lashes out at Lenu due to her own shame of not feeling included, and her valid distrust of the bourgeoisie who have not helped Lila escape her violent social conditions. Lila is also perturbed that Lenu is not using her skills and talents to talk about their shared experiences and help improve their neighborhood. On the other hand, Lenu represents the bourgeoisie. Although she is never quite accepted into it, she romanticizes yet also never understands Lila, her best friend, only perhaps understanding her at the very end of the show. This represents how polarized class dynamics blinds people, even best friends, to one another's lived experiences. We have to go back a few decades and look at fascist Italy, where the war between the right and the left really began. Fascism in Italy was a response to the Bolshevik Revolution and fears of communism in Italy, a desire for Italian imperialism, and a nationalistic desire to make Italy so-called great again. Victory in World War I gave Italy a permanent seat in the Council of the League of Nations, but it did not receive the territories it was promised. In 1922, Benito Mussolini became Prime Minister of Italy, stoking anti-socialist and expansionistic nationalistic sentiments. Because the wealthy and powerful in Italy feared a communist uprising, civilian and military police gave fascist vigilante street squads known as the Black Shirts immunity. They allowed them to act outside of the law in a civil war against Bolshevism, because the Black Shirts and later the Black Brigades often aligned with the interests of the wealthy or corrupt politicians. Before becoming one of the most famous fascists of the 20th century, Benito Mussolini was a young socialist, but he split with the movement and then stoked a wave of anti-socialist violence to power in Italy. By 1939, the party had 2,600,000 members. The motto of the young fascists was believe, obey, fight. In 1940, Mussolini took his country into World War II on the side of Nazi Germany, but soon was met with military failure. From 1940 to 1943, fascism failed the test that it had set itself. Indeed, it was the only standard by which it wanted to be measured, as a mass-mobilizing dictatorship forming the nation for victorious war and conquest, since the Allies invaded Italy in 1943. While Mussolini was killed in 1945, his legacy still haunts Italy today. The decades referred to as the Years of Lead were between 1968 and 1988, when around 428 murders have been attributed to political violence in the form of bombings, assassinations, and street warfare between one group nostalgic over Mussolini-era fascism and the other group identified as anti-fascist called the Red Brigades, inspired by the Italian partisans and 1970s-era armed struggle in the Global South. This decade is portrayed in Season 3 of the show, in particular symbolized by Pasquale, who was part of the Red Brigade, and Gino, Lenu's first boyfriend, who ended up as a fascist and part of the Black Brigade. Mafia refers to Sicily's organized crime network, but there are others in Italy such as Ndrangheta and Camorra, which is the focus of the show since the Camorra rule in Naples. The characters of Don Achille and the Solaris represent these groups who took advantage of working-class people during the war years by acting as loan sharks, landlords, and black market profiteers. Don Achille owned the Soul grocery store and controlled much of the neighborhood. When he died, the owners of the Soul pastry bar shop in the neighborhood, the Solaris family, replaced him as loan sharks. Michele and Marcello begin terrorizing the neighborhood after this. In conclusion, Lenu and Lila's lives are profoundly shaped by the socio-political and economic forces of 20th century Italy. Both women fight for agency within a violent patriarchal society that imposes significant gender and class barriers. Their relationship with each other and with their neighborhood is marked by love, hate, and a shared struggle to define themselves. Through Lenu's eyes, the story unfolds as an attempt to capture Lila's power and their shared origins. Yet Lenu increasingly lives in a world of intellectual and literary pursuits, distancing herself from the raw realities of their upbringing. Lila, in contrast, remains rooted in the neighborhood, embodying the life that Lenu tries to describe but can no longer fully comprehend. Their dynamic is one of mutual admiration and envy. Lila covets Lenu's freedom and education, while Lenu yearns for Lila's confidence, beauty, and effortless brilliance. Together, they represent two halves of the same self. Two sides of the coin of modernity, and the goings-on around them illustrate Italian historical realities. The story tries to tell their shared story, united by a shared gender and working-class upbringing, but highlights the impossibility of telling that story cohesively, divided by their increasingly different class experiences.